Hello, everyone. Well, here we are at Palm Beach. We're looking out over the rocks here at the end of the beach, just a few yards away from where I got married to Vicky in 2016 in March. And this spot here is obviously very significant to me. So it's a beautiful day. It's Friday, so just everyone's relaxing. But we've heard a lot of news in the last 24 hours about the state of our economy and the way it's being managed by this government. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time to cover some of the main points that were made. One of them that is obvious to everybody that really thinks about it is that our forecasting shouldn't be relied on. So anybody that's now looking at the fact that everyone's surprised that, we had 0.9% negative growth in the second quarter when it was forecast that we'd have about a third of that, should start to question the forecasting and start going, well, the forecasts can't be trusted, can they, if they're going to get it that far wrong? So that was about three times wrong. The marketplace, which is made up of all those big banks, Westpac and co, they got it wrong. They said it was going to be minus 0.4%, but it was 0.9, minus 0.9. So a negative number, a contraction that was orders of magnitude different from what the market, which is the banks, expected, and also the Reserve Bank, who had previously said minus 0.3. So yes, the first point is that you can't trust these forecasts. So if you've got a government that's saying, look, it's going to grow, things are growing now, like Christopher Luxon did today out at a hangar at the Air New Zealand airport hangars, then, it doesn't make any sense, because we've just witnessed that clinging to forecasts that in the future, that's kind of like, hope, and I think Craig Rennie made it really clear that we don't really have a plan other than going back to what we were doing in 2015, hoping that property prices may increase as mortgage holders have a little bit more money. You hear him talking about how there's still 40% of those mortgage holders to kind of get a little bit more money, but nobody's spending. What they're doing instead is they're saving up buffers, or they're taking their money offshore. So it hasn't been the case that things are good. So for Christopher Luxon to actually tell us that things are growing now, that's deceptive, because the data's not saying that. Those that watch TVNZ Breakfast would have seen Bernard Hickey come on the show this morning quite early. And what did he say? Well, he said the September quarter data suggests that things are going backwards. The lead indicators that tell us what's happening this quarter, that's the manufacturing and services data. They're both below the 50% line, which means we're looking at a contraction in those two main sectors. That's got nothing to do with tariffs. That's got nothing to do with any of those kind of export factors. So to argue that, suddenly it's all okay as well is tenuous, isn't it? Like, it wasn't okay at first, but now it's okay, these tariffs, because the tariffs can change any time. And I think people continue to realize that it's not just, it's just not making sense to sort of suggest that, well, now tariffs are done for, we're not going to see any more changes, because we all know that things are uncertain in this world. We also know that when it comes to the whole clinging to the tariff kind of rhetoric that we were hearing from Nicola Willis over the last few months, and especially yesterday when she turned up to talk to the press, that this didn't correspond in terms of timing. So everyone knows that there's something wrong here, because the effect of tariffs on exports didn't actually kick in until after the June quarter really had finished. And as well as that, exports were running at a record level to the United States. We also know that other countries were much more affected by tariffs, but we saw the whole of Europe having positive GDP growth, much more positive in the UK as well. We saw positive GDP growth in the United States. We saw positive GDP growth in Australia. So we saw all of these countries, many, many more of them than New Zealand, having positive growth despite tariffs, but you've got Nicola Willis clinging to some kind of exception here that didn't correlate with the timing, and then kind of like pretending that she's some kind of magician or psychiatrist who can cast a blanket across all of New Zealanders and all of the consumers and all of the sectors and just say, look, I put it down to this chilling effect on the New Zealand psyche, as if the New Zealand psyche was a single or amorphous thing, that you can just blame for this. So this didn't stack up. We also saw a very quick attempt by libertarian people who were part of the Atlas Network. You might recall the Mont Pelerin Society. Well, two members of the Mont Pelerin Society stepped in very, very quickly to try and dominate the narrative and say, Nicola Willis, you've got to go, you've got to resign because you're not going far enough, you're not doing enough cuts, you're not bringing debt down fast enough. So they had anticipated that should we get a bad result, which is much, much worse than had been predicted by the market and by the Reserve Bank, then that they needed to control the narrative for their base. So they jumped in there. They got immediate headlines from the newspapers that are very sympathetic to Mont Pelerin, Atlas Network, neoliberalism. And of course, we started arguing about whether Nicola Willis should resign or whether or not she can keep going. But what we can all agree with really is that we need to change. We can't keep going with this situation where things just keep getting worse. Now, when you look at the data, 10 of the sectors out of the 16 sectors in New Zealand's economy all went backwards. That's not tariffs, right? So that's real manufacturing lack of confidence, despite investment boosts and these other attempts to kind of do some kind of stimulation. Things are still going backwards in the September quarter. We're seeing this whole thing about like we're going to grow and it's going to come right. Actually, now the business community are saying, well, it's actually not going to come right this year, and it's not going to come right necessarily next year. We might see some kind of flattening out, but we're probably looking at after the election before things will improve economically now. So the green shoots that we've been hearing about for about 9 months now turned out to be withered weeds. We keep hearing about the clinging to projections that turn out to be wrong, clinging to forecasts that tend to be wrong. Now, Craig Rennie made a very valid point as well over on BHN last night when he said that, you hear Nicola Willis using this term that it's backward-looking data, when all data is in the past. No data is in the future, is it? It's in the past. So by definition, all data is backward-looking. So this is kind of a technique to kind of minimize the data from Q2. Everyone understands that, yes, it's a lag. It's from 3 months ago. But we also understand that all data is telling us the truth and the facts compared to, say, the way in which we're looking forward and we're just guessing. So Christopher Luxcon is saying today that things that we're growing now, but he doesn't really know that. He's just taking that from a guess against the forecast. And I think, having looked at this now for quite some time, that what we're actually seeing is a government that's actually trying to hijack monetary policy, grow some houses like we were back in 2015. They've done 2 budgets so far where they've actually cut the public services, and the idea was that the private sector would step in, but they haven't, and take up those jobs and take up those buildings. We're seeing slumps in construction. We're seeing people lose their jobs. We're seeing underutilization in the workforce. We're seeing people on the job seeker queues, and we're seeing them stay there for longer. Instead of getting off the job seeker like National Party people promised they would, they're staying there for longer because there's no jobs to go to. Today we saw, for the first time, a little increase, a little improvement in the number of ads that there were for jobs. But that doesn't reflect necessarily that we've got less people going for those jobs. We've got more people going for jobs. We've got unemployment running at 5.2%, and that would be a lot higher if so many people weren't leaving the country as well. So Craig Rennie has been doing the thinking, a lot of this thinking for us, and I'm just reflecting some of it here for you here today in case you hadn't caught up with it. So both Bernard Hickey and Craig Rennie are saying we've got to change. This is real people's lives. This isn't just some sort of game that's played by rich people like Roger Douglas and Ruth Richardson and Nicola Willis, as they continue down that libertarian, Mount Polarin, Atlas Network ideological path, where debt is more important than people's livelihoods, their homes, their families, their children's future. This number on a chart and debt, where we don't borrow off our spreadsheet at more affordable interest rates. Instead, we go out and we have these conversations about public-private partnerships, and we take advantage of the fact that people don't understand that's far more expensive for us in the long run. That drives up the prices of everything. It stops us being able to access things like healthcare. It stopped our children being able to buy a house. It stopped us whenever you look at privatisation, it just drives up your bills. So look at electricity sector, for example. Have those prices come down? When John Key semi-privatised the gentailers, it was about mum and dad investors, and they sold this story to us. And now has your power prices come down, or have they gone up to pay for dividends to shareholders? Because those interests are in there. It's no longer about your good or the public good or the business good either. So this thinking has to change, and I think that's what we're hearing from a united number of people. I've got some children here having a good old time in the water right next to me, and nearby I've got people cutting grass and I've got people mowing lawns. So no matter where I go, I probably have to row out to sea to get a place where there isn't background noise, but it's all good. Kids playing on a Friday in the water. So yeah, in general, it was a big disaster yesterday, wasn't it? It was catastrophic. It was 0.9% negative growth, and we're hearing about how overall, on an annual basis, under Christopher Luxon's growth agenda, we've gone backwards 1.1% in terms of our GDP growth in the last 12 months, while Christopher Luxon has been entirely focused on this. So he's not getting the outcomes. And he talked about outcomes being all that mattered, right? So he wanted outcomes, and here's his outcome, minus 1.1%. He's saying we're growing now. That's not based on evidence. It's kind of the case that the more you look at Christopher Luxon, the more you realize that he's got a very small window. He doesn't really know what he's talking about. He's not some superior manager of the economy. He's some guy that's been brought in and learned a few lines. So he starts talking about investment boosts. We brought this in. But manufacturing data is showing us that despite investment boosts, there isn't people buying new plants. We're actually, the lead indicators are showing we're going backwards. We're seeing big real estate going backwards, selling the land. We're seeing these lead indicators telling us things are wrong, things are not right, things need fixing. And these are real people's lives. So stop playing a game here. You can play your political games if you're rich because it doesn't affect you, and you can recite your spin. But at the end of the day, people are being harmed, quite badly. We also heard the price of white bread had gone up 41% in the last year or so, and that's a real indicator of these centrals. They talk about getting back to the bread and butter. Well, the bread is up 41%. The butter, we all know that story about the price of butter. So the bread and the butter, that's the stuff that people are hurting over. So the polls are all showing Labour in front. Today's latest poll from Talbot Mills that was published in the Post this morning tells us all that Labour on 35% and National are adrift on 31%, which is quite close to that mark where they fall into the 20s. And this won't help them at all. What we also saw is a very, very significant indicator in that poll, which was taken between the 1st and the 10th of September. So only a couple of weeks ago, a week ago, in those days, and that was that 55% of New Zealanders now believe that we're heading in the wrong direction. 55% is a huge number of people, and it's pretty close to the number of people that felt that way just before the 2023 election. So that's the kind of territory where you change the government. And so we're looking at a one-term government right now, based on their performance, based on the outcomes, based on the data. And what we're seeing is them continuing to play a game, a con game, where they say, look, green shoots, look, this forecast, we're going to grow, we're going to recover, we're growing now, it's just one quarter. But when you look back, I think there's some kind of number like 5 of the last 9 quarters have been negative. You know, they talk about having inherited a recession years after they've been in power, and how they've inherited a mess and they're turning the joint around, but they're not, are they? You're not. The data is not showing a turnaround. The data is showing that Chris Hipkins is right when he says, look, they're making it worse. When they crash construction, the economists are saying, most of them are saying, just about all of them, there's not a range of views really. They're basically saying, hey, you crashed construction and you took the guts out of the economy and it fell over and we haven't really recovered. And businesses haven't recovered in time either to really come back. You know, retail took a hammering. You know, all those shops, if you go down to Newmarket right now in Auckland, half the shops, probably 2/3 of them, have for lease signs on the windows. They're all closed. I've never seen it like this. You hear stories in the news now every week about old shops, your favourite old stores when you were a child that you used to go to, and it's closing down after decades and decades, maybe 100 years of being open. The favourite restaurants are closing. The favourite shops are closing. And we're not building new shops with Nicola Willis. She's not going to step in because she believes in market-led approaches. Well, the market's saying things are bad here. They're much worse than they are in comparable countries. The figures show that there's something wrong with the economy in New Zealand. It's not tariffs. It's not the psyche. It's actually the way in which people don't have a job. It's the way that people don't spend money when they could lose their job or when they're working part-time because they can't find a job. And, you know, one of the first things that these guys did was take away the dual mandate where we care about jobs from the Reserve Bank. We've seen 2 of the most senior leaders at the Reserve Bank go under Nicola Willis's watch. She knew all that time the truth and she didn't talk to us. And I think that's another problem that the public have, is that Nicola Willis could actually be maintaining a lie, maintaining some kind of lie for months and months on end. We saw that her excuses didn't really add up, and we've seen Barbara Edmonds make some big progress on prosecuting this matter in Parliament. There's also been the case of pay equity theft, you know, to prop up Nicola Willis's budget, which is morally bankrupt. You know, they hid this in Project 10. They made a deliberate decision to actually hide this from low-paid workers in a cost of living crisis to make things worse and take away $12.8 billion in pay equity from those workers, 180,000 of them. Next week, we're seeing senior doctors go on strike because Health New Zealand doesn't have the money to actually pay them properly. And Health New Zealand continue to keep offering them real terms pay cuts. Real terms pay cuts don't cut it for senior doctors in this country. And they keep trying it on like a con job. They're just going to keep trying it on because behind the scenes, Nicola Willis has under-budgeted health. So they haven't addressed the workforce planning. They haven't addressed the understaffing, the safety issues. They haven't addressed pay conditions for all these workforces. And it's got to stop. So what are we seeing? Well, today we saw the Health New Zealand people who are, you know, under the hammer from Nicola Willis and Simeon Brown basically say, well, we're going to take you to the ERA and we're going to override, you know, the conditions of your ability to go on strike and do this kind of thing because you haven't come back to the table. Well, basically the unions are saying, well, you haven't addressed all of our issues. And those issues are the ones I just mentioned, you know, continuing to offer real terms pay cuts, not addressing the workforce planning, continuing on with these unsafe staffing levels. Those are our concerns. You haven't addressed them. So you won't meet the threshold at the ERA. But those kind of industrial actions and the implications for all the other industrial actions we're seeing from the ERA, you know, that's playing out because we are so committed in this government to neoliberal idealism, you know, the kind of stuff that came from Ruth Richardson and Roger Douglas. And so Chippy came out today and he wouldn't go as far as to say that Willis should resign, but he said we certainly need the whole government to resign. We need to get a new government in there that's got a different ideology, one that stimulates the economy, one that actually doesn't lie to us all the time about green shoots and growth, that isn't based on anything but flaky forecasts, because we can't trust those forecasts, can we? We shouldn't be hearing this inconsistency from the National Party. Before the election, it said, international factors have nothing to do with things. Today, they're saying international factors are everything to do with things, and it doesn't stack up to the average person. So I think, there comes a time when, you've got to be kind of a masochist if you keep voting for this. You just like being messed with. You like your country to be destroyed, don't you, if you keep voting for Nicola Willis and Christopher Luxon and Davey Boy and New Zealand First. Now, all of this news came in the middle of a week where we also saw this government kind of turning its nose up at the United Nations Commission on Genocide in Gaza and in Israel. And that basically was pretty hard to dispute. So they just basically ignored it and said, we're going to wait for a court to make a decision. But as you saw in the conversation articles that came out, there was evidence that there's 3 genocides in recent history, or maybe it was 4, where waiting around for a court to make a decision technically about the legal definitions of genocide has always meant that the genocide carries on until it's over, and the court takes another year down the track to finally say, that was genocide that we failed to do anything about. And so I think there's a kind of a cynical move in the New Zealand government to harness this kind of process that means genocide can carry on, and they won't do anything. So they won't intervene to help people in the economy, while things like unemployment for the Pacific people are over 12%, while the price of food is up 5%, while everything else is like raging up, in numbers that are far greater than inflation. Essentials like bread at 40%. The minimum wage is only going up 1.5%. So you can sort of see what's going on here is that they're punching down and punishing people, taking away their ability to even stay still. And, they talk about you want to get ahead, but they are making people go backwards in the public sector and when it comes to the minimum wage. So at the same time, they're laying on top of retailers all of these bank charges because they won't do anything about the big banks. The big banks are all members of the New Zealand Initiative, so they're not going to do anything about their friends. The Gentailers are all friends as well. They're members of the New Zealand Initiative. So these Atlas Network people are kind of immune and protected, while we've got a former director of the same company, the Atlas Network New Zealand Initiative, is the finance minister right now. That's Nicola Willis. She's come straight out of there into politics, and now she's our finance minister. She's not qualified. And the outcomes show that this old way of thinking from the 1990s and then again in 2012, 2010, it hasn't worked. It worked before because there wasn't so much debt that people had to carry in their homes. But this game has run its course. Over the last 40 years, our climate conditions have got worse and worse and worse. And now we're at the point where, we're passing tipping points. We're talking about catastrophic conditions because we keep delaying. New Zealand government is sitting on its hand when it comes to climate as well. They're not going to fund anything. They're not going to intervene. They're not going to do anything. They're going to take a market-led approach, which is the ETS, okay? So instead of all of those things that we were doing that felt good, like the boilers in schools, the Giddy projects, the storage batteries, the ideas to transition over, all of that's going really slowly, and we're not seeing anything but pandering to agriculture. We want to look after agriculture, but we're putting our faith in future tech that doesn't actually exist. We're kind of clinging on to the fossil fuel industry. We're going back to drilling. This government that cannot actually be allowed to continue anymore if you care about the world, if you care about this country, if you care about your community. It's really messing it up. And I've been saying this now for years, really, but months in general. I've been on a campaign, which may not be very popular, but it's basically the truth that this is a one-term government and we need to vote them out. So that's probably all I need to say on a Friday afternoon, because now it's time to go and have some fun, isn't it? We've got all this bad news, but at least Labour are out in front. The National Party people must be feeling very bad right now because they voted for the wrong ideology. Their party has been taken over by the wrong leadership, but they will not change it. You've got Christopher Luxon fiercely defending his friend, on a personal level. So he's not objective. He's saying she's my very, very close friend and she's absolutely the greatest person that's ever been our finance minister in this country, which is completely absolute rubbish. It's completely out of step with the evidence. So you've got La La Land, Delulu, we've got this man running the country, very unpopular because he doesn't speak factually and he doesn't speak beyond his spin, and he's completely inept. And we all know this. So here I am saying it again and again because apparently some people don't listen, like a lot of those nat trolls that are on G News at the moment that come in and say stupid things and can't even spell. So, so here we are at Palm Beach, and I interviewed Deborah Russell this morning, and that was really, really great. It's so good to talk to someone who's really on their game and knows everything and very connected. And we're seeing that right across the front bench of the Labour Party, that we've got all this experience and intellectual heft, I think, people that know what their portfolios are about. Next week, I'll be talking to another few people that are from the Labour Party. I've tried to talk to people in the Greens. I haven't heard back at this stage. So happy to talk to people. If you want to talk to me, get in touch with me on my page or message me. Just have a really great Friday afternoon. I hope you enjoy yourselves. And it's beautiful here at Palm Beach. That's Nani Island. And these are the rocks I used to fish on when I was a boy. In the mornings, I come out here with my little fishing rod. And hopefully we can actually save the moana here from the Kalerpa and bring back the fish and the kelp and have all this place restored like it used to be when I was a kid, so that future generations can enjoy this place like we did. Have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you all again soon.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah.